Terrific. His teacher had asked him, and he said no. And his uncle, who had prepared him for bar mitzvah, asked him, and he said no. But when Milton asked him, he said yes. So we asked him, why did you say yes? Well, the rabbi asked me to do it, and he saw the men doing it, so he said yes. He didn't know what it was, he said, when they asked him. So it was something strange he never saw with him. Oh my God. But that's why, I love to get him to go, particularly because his parents are, on the Grace Street side of things. And it's like, how did this happen?
All right, so we're going to start now. We're on 154. Okay, so we're in the middle of something I call sort of cause and effect theology. So they're going through what sins lead to what disasters. And what's interesting here, you'll see, is that we've had this already for the last several weeks, and in general, what we've had is national disasters. So we attribute national disasters to these particular sins. You're going to see it narrows very much this week to what individual sins lead to individual illnesses for the most part. So it's going to lead into a merging of these two worlds, which is often a mistake. I'd say it's a categorical mistake of the world of biology and the world of morality, the world of biology and the world of ethics, where if you make a mistake in the world of ethics or morality, it leads to something going wrong biologically in your body. And really, it's kind of a retroactive explanation for illnesses. And the rabbis really seem to believe this, so that there were certain illnesses that were symptoms not just of something that was physically going wrong, but of something ethically that went wrong. And it's really, I think it's their big categorical mistake that they assume that everything in the world of biology has some kind of reference, parallel to the world of ethics. And so it's important, I think, to read these and sort of understand their mentality and kind of what we think about it. And because we still do that. We still ponder those two worlds, the world of ethics, the worlds of biology, what the connections are, and kind of gets to the connection between mind and body. So anyway, we've done some of this already just to get us back into it. We'll start on page 154. I think what we'll do is start in the second paragraph from the bottom, due to the sin of vulgar speech. A good place to start. Ba'avon navlut peh. Okay, everybody with me? Yes. Ba'avon navlut peh, because of vulgar speech, tsarot rabot. Terrible troubles come. Tsarot, is tsuras. Right? You've heard of that tsuras before. So tsarot rabot come because of...
Is that the same
It's
word
the same. Tsuras.
As for Miriam's...
No, it's not the same. Tsarat. Actually, it is related. It's related. Tsarat is leprosy. You have the letters tzadik and resh, tsar, which seems to be a root of a lot of problematic things that happen to people in the Torah. Tsak, like Mitzrayim, by the way. So tsar means narrow. So a kind of narrowness and constricting of blood vessels, which is what leads to illness. So you have, and it's also trouble. Trouble is a narrowness. The opposite of that would be an expansiveness. An expansiveness means sort of freedom. So this may be a play on words, really. Well, it is a kind of play on words, although it also seems to be the derivation of the word Egypt. So the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. The root of that is tsar, which is narrowness. So narrowness is the slavery that we went through in Egypt. But the name Egypt probably isn't derived from they were our slave masters, so they put us in these narrow straits. It's probably the Nile, which is this very narrow head of the Nile. So it became the land of narrowness, referring to the Nile. But in our own imaginations, and a lot of rabbis have made a big deal out of this, Mitzrayim is our land of narrowness, the place where our possibilities were narrowed. So in Egypt, that's a long-winded answer to the question. But so Passover celebrates freedom, which is going from narrowness, the narrow possibilities of slavery, to the wide open expanses of freedom. All right. Anyhow, ba'avon navlut peh tsarot rabot, terrible troubles come because of vulgar speech. Ugzerot kashot, and also harsh decrees, mitchadshot, are renewed. So also the non-Jews treat us badly because of that. So it's not just biological consequences, but political consequences come because of vulgar speech. Uvachure sonei Yisrael meitim, and our youth die. They use a they say the youth of the enemies of Israel, because they don't actually want to say the youth of Israel, because by saying it could make it true. So they use a euphemism. But what they mean is that our children will die, okay, as a consequence. Yitomim va'amanot soakim. Orphans and widows will cry out to God, ve'enan ne'anin. They will not be answered. Shenemar. And all this is because of a verse. This is in a series of verses that we have that predict this fire and brimstone. Al-Kain, because of that, because of the vulgar speech, if you look up the verse, Bachurav lo yismach Adonai, God will not delight in your youth. Ve'et yetomav almanotav lo yirachem, God will not have mercy on your widows and your orphans. Why? Ki chulo chanef, because of all the vulgar speech. Umeira, and evil. V'chol peh dover nivala, and also because every mouth is saying terrible things. B'chol zot, because of that, lo shavapo, God's anger will not be appeased. Ve'od yado netuyah, and his hand will still be outstretched. All because you said bad things. All because of vulgar speech. Now we'll get an example of vulgar speech. Ma ve'od yado netuyah. So why will God's hand be outstretched? What kind of vulgar speech will cause this? Amar Rabbi Chanan bar Rava. Rabbi Chanan bar Rava says, Hakol yodin kala lama nichnasa l'chuppah. Everybody knows why the bride enters the chuppah. Everybody knows, in other words, what happens the wedding night. But I'm not going to engage in vulgar speech to describe it to you. I'm not going to engage in immodest speech. Ella call him in a bel peeve. But anybody who outright says it, or laughs, kind of locker room humor, laughing about what happens, afterwards. Even if previously that person had been written for a life of 70 good years, at that moment you engage in that locker room humor. So keep that in mind, by the way. We've had this before, but it's a good reminder, right? Even if you were promised, you had been gozer. Gozer means you were sealed. Remember the difference between being written and being sealed. So even if you were sealed for 70 good years, in an instant, when you say that terrible thing, it switch overs to ra'ah, to evil. Okay? Amar Rabba bar Shela, Amar Rav Chista. So Rav son of Shela says in the name of Rav Chista, Kol min abelet piv, if you have vulgar speech, mamikim lo gehanom. You've dug a pit for yourself in hell, in Gehenna. Shne Amar, Sucha amuka. Now Sucha amuka, here's the verse. Sucha amuka pizarot. Sucha amuka means a deep pit. But there's a play on words here. Sucha also means speech. So because of speech, you get an amuka, you get a deep pit. Pizarot, because you said terrible things. So because of saying terrible things, you've dug a pit for yourself. Where? In Gehenna. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar. Af shomeh v'shotek. So Rabbi bar Yitzchak says, even if you hear something, you hear this terrible speech, you hear people making fun of the bride or making fun of what's going to happen, and you don't say anything, v'shotek, shnet mar ze'um Adonai yipol sham. God's anger will come and dig the pit for you. Okay, shomei v'shotek. So even if you hear these terrible jokes and you don't say anything, be very careful of your speech. Yeah.
Question: if this is the one thing that overrules having been sealed,
right?
Is there any other thing anywhere that
also overrules?
That would overrule your being sealed?
All sorts of things.
You're sealed for 70 years.
No.
You think you're safe when
you're not. Yeah. It's never sealed. It's never totally sealed. On either side, on either way. You could be sealed for, right, exactly. You could be sealed for, that's what's, otherwise there's no point in tshuva, right, exactly. Otherwise no point in tshuva. So the whole thing about being sealed is a kind of a fiction, a convention. For the rabbis, you're never really sealed until your dying day, until your dying moment. That's the power of tshuva. And tshuva for the good, so you can overrule. But also, a life of sin can open you up to all sorts of terrible things. Don't ever think that. So every day you have to go through life thinking, my whole life is in front of me, for good or for bad. There's never a sense that I'm done. All right, I've done my last good deed. Now I can go out and do whatever I want. I can make all the kind of jokes I want now. It's never sealed. That the very first prayer after Yom Kippur, you do 26 hours. You fast. right? And you repent, and you're feeling good about yourself. Tshuva. And then at some synagogues, including ours, you do the Mariv service. Right. The Mariv service is the evening service, which is not a Yom Kippur service anymore. But we've got all those people there, so we might as well start them off in a good year. So we're going to daven Mariv. You've got 5 more minutes to fast. What's the very first line of the Mariv service? Anybody know by heart? V'hu rachum yechaper avon. It's asking God for forgiveness. What's going on? 26 hours I've been asking God for forgiveness. I feel good. I've been sealed for a good life. What's my first prayer? Please, God, forgive me. How much could I have sinned in the 30 seconds in between the end of Yom Kippur? But the idea is I might have sinned a little bit. It doesn't matter. I could have undone the whole thing. I could have done the whole thing in those 30 seconds. So the first thing I asked for in my Mariv service back to the real world is, please, God, forgive me.
But Aaron and his sister did not repent when they were stricken with leprosy because of what they said about Moses' wife.
They didn't specifically repent.
No,
we don't have a record. We don't have a record of them repenting.
No.
But we do have Moses praying for them.
Prays on their behalf.
Right. So you can pray on people's behalf too.
To repent, right?
Yeah.
For the guy to repent.
Okay. All right. Page 155. So now we get to the individual illnesses. Then I'm going to say something about Crohn's disease because I brought it up last time and in my email. Amar Rav Oshaya. So Rav Oshaya says, Kol memarek atzmo la'aveira. So anybody who even prepares himself to commit a sin or herself, chaberot p'tza'im yotzim bo. Bruises will appear. It's like you'll have a psychosomatic reaction. Although they wouldn't have called it psychosomatic. They would say there was actually God. It's part of the biological system and the ethical system are intertwined for the rabbi. So bruises start appearing on your body kind of as a warning to stop you from sinning. So even as you prepare for a sin, shene amar. So they have a verse, chaburot petza tamruk bira. And basically what the verse means is that bruises appear when you're preparing to do evil. V'lo od, ela shenidon behidrokan. You get judged with hidrokan. Hidrokan is internal swelling. I admit that I mistranslated that as Crohn's disease. People wrote me back, and when I wrote the email, that of course Crohn's disease wasn't even discovered, I think, till the 20th century. So there wasn't an ailment that was actually labeled as Crohn's disease until the 20th century. But they clearly here refer to, and Steinsaltz gets it wrong because I've done some research on this. So it's clearly referring to internal bowel disease of some sorts, the kind of swelling, which is associated with all sorts of things like colitis and Crohn's disease. And so I put in Crohn's disease because I've got Crohn's disease in it, but it's because it comes and goes. Well, it comes and goes. Yeah, so that's why. So it's a chronic ailment that comes and goes, and they seem to have some understanding of it. That's interesting also, that before X-rays, they had some understanding of what was going on in the intestines. They knew what intestines were. But they were very sure that there were ethical. They knew that there were biological things going on, and they also understood that sometimes biological things don't have some kind of parallel in the ethical world. But they said sometimes they do, and so internal swelling, which I call internal intestinal swelling. I'm not getting into the details of what Crohn's disease is or is not. I've got doctors here and they can tell you about it. But under this general rubric of internal swelling of the gut, that stuff is Crohn's disease, and they had a sense that it was caused by ethical failings. So I'm going to keep going. Shnei amar umakot chadrei baten, as it says in the same verse. Makot are plagues of the innards, of the intestines or the guts. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak siman la'avera hidrokan. And Nachman bar Yitzchak said that that's a sign that you sinned. If you've got that kind of internal swelling, colitis, Crohn's disease, those things, it's because you sinned. Tanu Rabbanan. Now the rabbi said, getting a little bit more specific and maybe a little more sophisticated, although I've said before, all this is very troubling. Shlosha minei hidrokanhen. There are 3 types of internal bowel disease. Shel aveira ava. So one is of a specific illness, and that's a real thick swelling. V'shel ra'av, but there's also biological, just purely biological, if you just haven't eaten enough. Okay? And that's another kind of just swelling, tapuach swelling. V'shel kshafim. And there's also kind that come if you do witchcraft. And that's a thinner kind of swelling. So I know. So somehow they knew that.
It was a medieval invention.
Witchcraft?
Yeah, it may have started.
Nah, you've got witchcraft mentioned in the Bible. Sorcery, wizardry, magic. You got that. That's I think like from time immemorial we've had that. The Egyptians practiced that too. Right, exactly. Okay.
Saul went to visit.
Okay. So what's interesting here is so they make this blanket diagnosis. Although they do say like, look, maybe sometimes it's not some kind of sin. Sometimes it's simply the guy's got bad eating habits. And that leads up to it. Ra'av, because you're not eating the right things. You're not eating when you should. They had specific ways of going to the bathroom too that they felt would heal these diseases. These were clearly very common in Talmudic times, as by the way they're very common right now, right? Yeah. Now we have maybe better treatments, although we still don't have great treatments, honestly, for this stuff. Okay. Shmuel Katan Chashbe. All right. So Shmuel, who was a great sage, felt symptoms of this particular disease, the internal bowel disease. So of course he's upset because in his culture it's associated with moral failures. And this is Shmuel. Shmuel was one of the great rabbis, really, one of the 10 great rabbis of all time, and a person of impeccable integrity, and suddenly gets this disease. So this is interesting here. I think that the editor of the Talmud puts it there on purpose to say, hold off, everybody, on your moral judgments. You're going to be persuaded sometimes to impose moral judgments on people with these illnesses, but Shmuel got it. So be careful. Okay. So he says, Ribono shel olam, yimei fi. So this is God. Who's going to be able to tell that? Who's going to be able to tell that I have this for internal biological reasons and not because I'm a sinner? So he's upset that he gets it. Itze, amarcha, and so God healed him because of that. So he became healed because of that. Abai chashbe. So and then Abai got it. So that's very interesting. All these famous rabbis get this disease, which we've just associated with moral failures. So Abai chashbe, Amar Rava. So Rava, who is Abai's best friend, study partner, and of course also the guy that he argued with, because that's what best friend meant in those days, is the guy that you argued with and disagreed with. So Rava comes to his defense. Yadana be Nachmani. I know Nachmani. Nachmani, by the way, was his real name. Right, Abai wasn't his name. Abai comes from Abba, like father. It wasn't his real name. So now he gives us his real name. Dimechafei nafshe. I know that Abai didn't get it because of sin. I know that he's got some bad eating habits, and that's why he got it. Rava chashbe. So then Rava gets it. All these rabbis thought there's an outbreak, but it shows also that it was common. And they're also the editors of the Talmud here are really trying to pull back from the moral judgments and saying, don't be so quick to judge. All these famous rabbis had it too. So when you see your neighbor having it, don't say, it's a proof of Lashon Hara. It's because of Rava and Avai. So now Rava got it. Now, Rava hu damar nefishe kitile kedar uminifiche kafan. Okay. Unfortunately, I have to translate this. It's kind of vulgar. But Rava is the guy that said that the reason people die in their youth sometimes is because they don't go to the bathroom properly. So Rava, let me just say this. Rava, we know, was a health nut. Yeah. We know that he ate correctly and that he had all sorts of positive digestive practices that he would teach other people. So how could he possibly have this disease, leading us to the only implication? The only implication is that he must be a sinner.
That's right.
Because we know that he ate well. We know that he practiced impeccable hygiene. So he must have been a sinner. At the same time, we know that Rava wasn't a sinner.
Sounds like something contagious.
They don't look at that as being a possibility. So now they say, no, he wasn't a sinner. Shane Rava, da'anse l'Rabbanan ba'idana ba'al korche. So no, in Rava's case, it was different. It's that the rabbis would keep him after the lecture and ask him questions, so he wouldn't have time to go to the bathroom. That's what it means. It also could be interpreted as he didn't have time to go and eat. So the rabbis actually, because they were nagging him so much with questions about the lesson, they wouldn't allow him to go get a snack, to eat an apple when he should, or to go to the bathroom like he should. Right. So weird stuff. It's weird stuff. However, the moral principle is not so strange, and it's first they associate these diseases with moral failures, then they draw back and say, the leaders of our generations had these diseases, and there were reasons why. And if you look a little deeper, you can understand the reasons why, and they were not moral failures. So they're trying to grapple with the origins of illness and the connection between illness and moral failures, coming to conclusions, but then drawing back from those conclusions.
Is there any evidence for sympathy in here? Like every time you do something bad, or every time something bad happens, you lose a child, you get sick.
Yeah.
It's your fault.
Yeah.
Is there any
It's very dangerous.
People,
Not here so much, but in other passages in the Talmud, there's lots of room for sympathy. I mean, so other passages of the Talmud have how important it is to visit the sick, and they're very moving scenes of rabbis going and visiting each other. And I think we're going to get to a few of those, but not right here. Not right here. Like I said, So remember how we started this discussion with real fire and brimstone. Yeah. If you sin, it's, God is going to come and wipe out your cities, and it's to help us be afraid of sin. Now we goes to the individual and individual suffering, and then it's this drawing back. So don't be so quick to judge people that are ill. So then we also have the logical extension, which is, of course, you go and visit people and you help people that are ill and that are sick, and you shower them with mercy and empathy and love. So you have all of it. Talmud's a big book. It's a big book, yeah. All right, a little bit more. Tano Rabbanan. Arba'a simanin heim. So these are mnemonics. So 4 ways to remember the connection between sins and illnesses. Simanin. Siman la'avera. Hydrokan, okay, and they go back to a sign of just sin, which the later rabbis interpret as gossip, is this internal bowel disease. Siman l'sinat chinam, a sign of causeless hatred, so there's hating people in your community. Yerakon, so yerakon is the Aramaic word that comes from Hebrew yarok. What is yarok? Yarok means green, but it means jaundice. So green, we think of jaundice as being a yellowing, right, of the flesh. So they use the word green, but it's a jaundice. Siman legasut haruach, a sign of arrogance is you suddenly become poor. So siman l'shon hara, a sign of gossip, indulging in gossip. Askara, which interesting is they don't translate that. You actually have in the note, askara is diphtheria, an infectious disease of the throat that causes the mucous membrane in the throat to swell. What's interesting is that, I don't know if you're interested in ancient diseases, askara in modern Hebrew, anybody know what that is? Actually, Ray should know because it's diabetes. Oh. Now, that I believe, and I haven't looked it up, I believe that's a play on words because you have the word sukkar in there, and sukkar means sugar. Now, would the rabbis have been able to have known the connection between? Probably not, right? There isn't any way they could know the connection between sugar and diabetes. Could they? I don't think so, because I think it's not until you could.
I'm not sure the word sugar had entered into, or even
they didn't have
the sugar. They didn't have sugar then.
They didn't have sugar.
All right. They didn't have sugar.
Didn't have sugar. Okay. All right. So then some later, brilliant person decided, okay, we got a disease in the Talmud that's got the same root as sugar, so we'll call that disease diabetes. So now the other thing I don't know is, did they have something called diabetes that they recognized as a distinct illness in the Middle Ages? I don't know that. Anybody know that? I don't know.
Yeah, they had, because people with diabetes developed a very, especially those with type 1 diabetes, developed a specific odor.
Oh, okay, that's
of
interesting.
ketones.
Right.
Okay.
So the ketone odor
is
is a sort of a sweet, sickening
Oh, okay. Well, that's
smell.
interesting.
So they would be able to tell.
Okay, all right.
There was something
all right.
going on, yeah.
So anyway, so at some point, the word that Steinsaltz is translating as diphtheria became diabetes. Now, it could be that there was a Talmudic form of diabetes that they recognized. So I don't know. I can look that up and find that out later. Yeah.
But play on words in modern Hebrew could make sense.
Yes. I think that's probably it. Sugar disease. It's called sugar disease. But if there was a sweet smell, they might have been able to. But not in Talmudic times, because you're right. They didn't have the substance sugar. Right. Okay. All right. Tinu Rabbanan. So now, as long as we're talking about this disease, askara. I'm just going to call it askara. Tinu Rabbanan. Askanan ba'leolam al ma'aser. So the sages taught askara. That disease comes because of the neglect of tithes. Okay. But Rabbi Eliezer bar Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi, says al lashon hara. He says that it becomes because of gossip. Amar Rava v'itema Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So Rava said in the name of Rabbi Levi, my kra'ah. So what about this verse? Hamelach yismach belohim. The king will rejoice in God. Yitalel kol nishbat bo. the people that swear in God's name will be praised. Ki yisaker pi dovrei sheker. For the mouth that speaks lies will be blocked up. So the yisaker there also means blocked up. Okay? And saying that, so that there's sort of a play on words. The yisaker means blocked up, is askara. So it's the people that tell lies. That's the verse. The people that tell lies, or it could be that engage in gossip, will end up with that disease, askara. That's why it says that if you have that disease, it's a sign you engaged in gossip. Okay. We'll turn the page a little bit more. A question was asked. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi, al lashon hara kamar, o dilma af lashon hara. Okay, so the question is, does when you see somebody suffering from askara, is it across the board because of gossip, or is it in addition to other things that might happen? You get askara, or no, in addition to other sins, also gossip causes the disease. Okay, you may not have been wondering that, but the rabbis were wondering. Tashma, come in here. Kishi nichnasu rabotenu lekerem beyavne. So when the rabbis came to Yavne, so you know how Yavne started. Yavne started because the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, and according to the legend, which is in the Talmud too, Rabbi Yochanan asked the Romans, set aside this town, Yavne, where I can reconstitute the Sanhedrin, rabbis can gather together, and we can rescue Judaism. We'll lose the temple, but we'll still have a group of rabbis together making Jewish law. So a bunch of things happened at that first meeting in the vineyard of Yavne. There was a vineyard in Yavne, the rabbis gathered together, and they made a bunch of laws. So among those laws were some thoughts about Lashon Hara. Hayasham Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yisov, Rabbi Shimon. This is it. There were only these rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda was there, Rabbi Elazar was there, and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Okay. Nishala she'elozo bifnehem. And this question came up, among other things. The Talmud has a lot about that particular meeting of those rabbis because they decided lots of stuff. So another thing came up. Makeza zo, askara, this particular illness, mipnei ma matchelet bivnei ma'im v'gomeret pepeh. So this particular illness, why does it start with the innards and end up in the mouth? They're going to make a homiletic kind of parallel between the disease itself and also the sin. Na Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda answered by Rabbi Eli. He answered in the name of Rabbi Ali. Rosh hamidabrim b'chol makom. Rabbi Eli, who was the head speaker wherever he was, probably because he had the loudest voice, but we're going to have a story about him for a second. So he was sort of the spokesperson. He was the mouthpiece of the rabbis. This is what he said. Afal pi sheklayot ya'atzot. All right, so this is how Lashon Hara starts. So you start thinking about it in your innards. You know, like this unpleasant idea starts to develop in your innards. V'lev mavin, it works its way up to the heart. Then the heart starts to believe it. So you have like this inchoate bad feelings about a certain person, and then your heart starts to believe it. It's a fascinating little theory about how sin comes about. Sin doesn't start when you do it. Sin starts as you start to think about it. And when you start to say bad things about your neighbor, it doesn't start when you make the statement. It starts before that. So, and they're comparing it to illness. Illness starts here, but it ends up in the mouth. So they're saying the same thing. So bad thoughts, they start before they're even thoughts. So when they're talking about the innards, they're saying it's just kind of this weird, unpleasant, inchoate feeling start in your gut, and then they develop in the heart. Your heart starts to understand it and believe it. V'lashon mechatech, and then it starts to like tickle in your throat, in your tongue. So it starts to come to your mouth. And what they're saying also is you have all sorts of opportunities to stop it. Okay? Like your heart starts to believe something unpleasant about a person, that's when you should stop it. By the time it gets to your mouth, you're not going to be able to stop it. So there's this whole process, you know. And of course it teaches like consider things before you say them. Consider your actions before you do them, because there's this kind of digestive process, which is similar to digesting food, which you should go through, and you can stop the process at any time. Right? Pegomer. And then the mouth stops it. So it's a complete parallel to the disease, which starts in your innards and ends up as a swelling in the throat. Diphtheria is the swelling in the throat. We'll stop there.
You think this is the reason they took it up first?